Hello again and welcome to section 3 of the vintage florals blanket. This section is back to working with squares, and it's a very simple granny square that you're going to be doing in different colours and then joining them with continuous join as you go this time. So let's get started with the tutorial. And now we're on to this section where we're going to be making these individual little granny squares. Very simple granny squares. They're 3 rounds, 1, 2, 3, with the centre round being made in one colour, usually darker, and then a paler colour to do the next 2 rounds. Now, you need to make 32 of these little beauties to go all the way round the blanket, and there are 8 different colour combinations, meaning that you'll be making 4 of each colour combination, and then you'll be attaching them to the blanket with a continuous join as you go technique, which I'll be showing you later on. So first of all, the blanket can go for the time being because we're just going to be working on these squares. This one is done with the Batik Heather and then the Stylecraft Special in Powder Pink, but I'll take a different combination to show you how to make it. So I've got the Batik Storm and the Stylecraft Special in Sherbet. So we'll start with the Batik Storm, chain 4. This is the way we started the squares in the first part. Chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then slip stitch into the very first chain to form the circle, like that. And then we're going to chain 2 because that is the equivalent of your first treble stitch. Because I'm going to just put my extra light on because the sun's gone behind a cloud. That's a bit brighter, is it for you? No, I can't see my camera. So we've got the chain 2 done, and then we're going to put 2 treble stitches into that space in the very centre of the circle. That's 1, 2, and that's the first cluster made. So then we want to form the corner, and to do that we're going to chain 2 and then into the centre again, and this time 3 trebles. 1, 2, 3, and the next corner is a chain 2, and we're going round again, so it's 3 trebles. 1, 2, and 3, and then chain 2. And if you look, you'll see that we've got one group of trebles there with a chain 2, another group of trebles with a chain 2, another group of trebles with a chain 2. So we've got one more group of trebles left to do. That's 1, 2, and 3, and chain 2, and then all you need to do is to slip stitch into the top of the first chain 2, pull it through, and you're ready to fasten off that colour, because that's the only time you're going to be using this colour. So that is the first round of the granny square. This will, when you come to sew in the ends, this will pull that centre hole nice and tight. Now, as ever, the next thing we do is we're going to turn the square over so that it's on the wrong side, and I'll take the next colour. This is the Stylecraft in Sherbet. And I'm going to find any of those 4 corner spaces, put my hook in and pull the yarn through to start. And then I'm going to chain 2. Again, this is the equivalent of the first treble stitch. Yarn over, 1 treble, 2 trebles. That's half of the corner. Yarn over into the next corner, straight in, there's no chains in between, straight into the next corner, and 1, 2, 3 trebles, chain 2, and 3 more trebles in that same corner. 1, 2, oops, and 3. And then into the next corner, 1, 2, 3 trebles. Remember, these are double crochet in US terms. Chain 2, 3 more trebles, and you can see the square, the granny square, forming quite neatly. That's that one. And now we've got 1 more empty corner to do, so that's 1, 2, 3 trebles, chain 2, 1, 2, and 3 trebles. And now we're back to the very first corner, and we've of course done half of that already, so you just need to put 3 trebles into that corner space, 1, 2, 3, and put the 2 chains in for the actual corner, and then we just slip stitch into the top of the first chain 2. Now that is round 2 done, but as you can see from this one, the rounds 2 and 3 are both done in the same colour, so we're not going to be fastening off this colour at this point. Instead, we're going to chain 2 and turn. And what happens is that we're going to start and work round another round. But as you can see, your chain 2 has come at the extreme, can you see that? Extreme right side of this corner. It's not in the middle, it's at the right hand side. So I'm going to call that number 1. That's the equivalent of the first treble. And what we're going to do is we're going to make the complete corner this time, not half of it and come round and finish it off. So I'm going to put in 2 trebles, and chain 2, and you can see that that is the first half of that corner done, but we're going to finish this corner off, so we're going to put in 3 more trebles, 1, 2, 3. So you just need to remember that that corner has already been completed. We don't need to finish it off by the time we come all the way round. Now, because we've got slightly bigger, we've got a space in the middle now as well, so we put our 3 trebles in the middle. And then the corner. Now I'm going to work fairly quickly around this one because it's plain sailing until I get to the end where I want to show you how we finish off. So that's this corner just about done. So as I say, there are 32 of these little beauties to make. 4 of each colour, and then there's a method of attaching them in a particular colour sequence for attaching them, which I'll show you later. And we're going to be using the continuous join as you go for this, which is great fun to do, not difficult, and it means that you only have one end at the beginning and one end at the end and to sew in, which is a great bonus. Right, so we're on to another corner. Every so often just stop, check that you've got 3 stitches there, that you haven't been distracted, and only put in 2 for each cluster. Now we're just about back to where we started, and that's the 3, no, that's just 2. That's the 3 stitches done in the middle, and now we're back to this first corner where we started, and of course we did the complete corner. So all you need to do is find the top of your first chain 2, make sure that you get through 2 loops because it makes it that bit firmer. There you go, 2 loops, pull through, cut the yarn and fasten off. Right, and that is the granny square. Now when you're attaching these granny squares to the blanket will be right side up, but the granny square will be flipped over so that the final round that you've done will be on the wrong side. In other words, this will be like that, which means that to sew in your ends, you want to pull anything that you've got on this side through to the other side and then stitch in the ends. And I'm going to do that just now because I want to remind you about the centre. I always start, when I'm doing the sewing in the ends, I always start with the one in the middle and make sure that that is firmly stitched down first of all, because what we need to do is close up this hole. So I am going to thread my yarn through the stitches, not right through to the other side, just between the layers of stitches. I'm not pulling it tight at this point, I'm just sort of threading it round the circle a bit like that, back to where I started, and then I'll pull the whole thing really tight, and you can see that that pulls that circle really nice and tight. Now that will just, if you just cut it at that point, it will just open up again, so you need to anchor that by going back the way a bit to make sure that your thread isn't going to loosen, or your yarn isn't going to loosen. And for the centre one, I usually go all the way back round, belts and braces as far as I'm concerned, just to make sure it doesn't come out. And I can cut that now right down to the bottom of the stitches, and there you can see that's nicely stitched down. The others don't need to be pulled so tight, it's just that middle one. So what you want to do is run your needle, you can weave it a little bit, picking up every second stitch or so, pull it through, and then pick up another stitch and weave it back the way, and then you can go a third way back again just to be certain and cut it. And this is my last one because, as I said before, I always keep my outside one and stitch it down, stitch it in once everything's attached, just to keep the outside edge as free-flowing as possible. If I've put extra stitches in, it can make it difficult to see when you're working along the edge, so I just leave them until I've done the next round. Right, and that is your simple granny square. So as I say, you've got 32 of these to make, and once they're all made, I'll be back to show you the piles that I've got of these, and I'll show you the sequence of the colours that you'll be joining, and the joining stitch, the continuous join as you go. So I'll pop back in a little while. Welcome back. I've got my squares, my granny squares done now for section 3 of the blanket. I've got 4 of each colour, apart from the last 2. I've just done 1 of each of those. Now that's just me trying to rush, because I'm trying to video this in light which is fading fast. We've got a glorious sunset outside at the moment, but that means that there won't be any daylight left, so I thought rather than make all 4 of these 2, I would just stop and start the join to let you see. So I've also got a knitting needle, and this is my method of laying out the colours. And what I do is I make what I call a yarn kebab, and basically all I'm doing is piercing the granny squares, putting them onto the knitting needle, and then they're in the right order, and I can pull them off one at a time to when I'm joining them to the blanket. Because what I'm doing is we've got 32 squares and I've got 8 colours, so I'm doing a sequence and sort of working my way along the different colours, and then that will repeat 3 more times. There's nothing particularly complicated about the way I've arranged the colours. It's just that I've put the pinks apart from each other, I've put the blues apart from each other, so that you don't get 2 pinks together. That's all. So you can follow my my list of colours, or you can make up your own combination. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to try and see if I can get, I've just put 8 on for the time being to start. So I'm going to put on one after the other. I've got my squares turned, well, they're all, first of all, they're all neatly sewn. All the ends are sewn in apart from the one on the edge, and they're turned so that the last round is wrong side uppermost, and I've made a neat pile of each colour, so I'm just going along. You can follow the pattern, the written pattern for the sequence of colours, but I'm just going to pierce these onto my knitting needle. You can't actually see what I'm doing, can you? There we go. Just pushing them through the middle. Here's my last 2 where I've only got 1 of each colour, like that. I'll push these out of the way just now because I won't be needing them for this tutorial. And I'll put my yarn kebab down and bring back the blanket. Now, as I said before, when we were doing the join for the centre of the blanket, the join as you go is always done on the front of the blanket. So always make sure that your stitch marker is uppermost, and we'll be joining that way when we're joining to the blanket. So I'll put the blanket here so that you can see the corner. See if I can get that in camera. Just move this. I don't have a lot of space, so as the blanket gets bigger it gets a little bit more difficult. That's about right. And the colour that I'm going to use to do the joining is mushroom. So I'll get my yarn kebab and my hook, and I'm going to pull the first one off. It doesn't really matter where you start. You know, we don't have to have the blanket a particular way up. I'm just going to start in any of the corners, and we're going to use the continuous join as you go method. This is just a little bit different from the simple join as you go, which you used in the centre. But it starts off pretty much exactly the same way. So I'm going to attach my yarn in a corner of the square and chain 2, and we're going to be working with half trebles again, which you'll find that you'll use for all the joins in this blanket. So chain 2 and 2 half trebles, that's 1, and half treble to remind you, yarn over, put your hook in, pull up the loop. You've got 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. That's a sort of medium-sized stitch. Now I'm going to work my clusters of 3 half trebles in each space along the side of this square. So far, just the same as the simple join as you go. I'm going to get to the next corner and just make 3 half trebles. So I've only got half of that corner made. And then I'm going to find my corner on the blanket and slip stitch. And then 3 half trebles back in that corner of the square. And then find the next space on the blanket and slip stitch, 3 half trebles again, and next space, so we're attaching with the slip stitch after each of the groups of half trebles. Now I'm at the corner and 3 half trebles. Can you see that? Here we have up one side, along this side, joining with your slip stitch, and now we're going to come down this side. And when you come down this side, this is the point where we differ slightly from the ordinary join as you go, the simple join as you go, because you would have gone down and come along the bottom and finished off, but we're not going to do that. We're going to leave that bottom part unworked for just now, and we'll have the next square ready to join. So I'm going to come down here and I'll come back when we've got to this point of the square. Okay, so I've come down the third side of this first square, and I'm now going to pull the next square off my knitting needle, and it's this pale rose colour. Now I've just done like when we were making the centre of the blanket. I've just done the first half of my corner, this corner. I haven't completed it, so now I'm going to go over, I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to start the first corner in this square. So I'm going to make my first half treble, and that's my second half treble and my third half treble. So if I lay that down there, you can see hopefully that I've got 3 half trebles in this corner and 3 half trebles in this corner. And now I'm going to go over to the next space up on my first square and make my slip stitch, and then 3 half trebles in the next one up on this side. You can flip, swing it round so that it's easier to see, but because I'm trying to work under this camera, I'll keep it in one position for the time being. So it is a little bit trickier for me. I would have normally swung that round to work. Okay, but we'll manage. So I'm going into the next space on the first square, making my slip stitch, and then 3 half trebles coming up into the next space and slip stitch. And you can see that the next space I have on this second square is the corner. So I'm going to put my 3 half trebles in here. And then it's time to attach that to the blanket. And we're going to share the same space where the first square was in. So we just need to slip stitch into that. Like so. And that's us going round 3 sides of this one and up the first side of the second one. And then I'm going to finish this with my 3 half trebles again and slip stitch into the blanket in the next space, 3 half trebles, and slip stitch. I find when I'm working, I quite like working this join, or any of my joins really, if I can sit at a table and have it flat in front of me. You can do it on your lap, but I quite like having it laid out in front of me. And what I do is I push my index finger in my left hand underneath the blanket so that it lifts it up, and I can get my hook quite easily into that space. I don't know why I do that. I just do it automatically, but it seems to be a little aid for while I'm working. So that's my 3. See what I'm doing there? And into the next one, and then I come down this side. Now, one thing about this corner, this join here, is that it can open up, and some people find that they're not too happy with the look of that being a little bit loose like that. So in this next one that I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how I keep them a little bit closer together, and then you can decide whether you want to do it simply like that or the way I do it in the next one. So I'm going to come down here now and start my third square and bring it up to this point, and I'll see you when we get to that point. And I'm at the corner, so 3 half trebles into the corner, and as I said, I'm going to do this corner very slightly differently to this one, and you can decide which one you want to do. And all that I'm going to do this time is I'm going to slip stitch first of all into the corner of square number 2, like that, and then slip stitch into the blanket before I continue and finish off this corner with the 3 half trebles. And you can see that that has held that together a little bit. See, if I pull that apart, it's anchored that bit more solidly than this one, which pulls apart. Can you see that? pulls apart more readily. So probably it's best to put a slip stitch into this square and the corner space of this square, and a slip stitch into the blanket as well. And I will continue. I think what I'll do is I'll continue with the next one, and I'll just pop back to show you the 2 slip stitches at the next corner. Then what I'll do is I'll work all the way around my blanket. I'll let you see it. As you can see, there is no half treble stitch going along the bottom as yet, and that gets done at the very end. Now, this is something to remember actually in any of the blankets that you're doing where you're using a continuous join as you go. One of the commonest mistakes that people can make is they do this all the way round, going round 3 sides of each square until they get back to where they started. Finish off and then start the next part of the blanket, and then they wonder because their stitch count is out a little bit and they can't get the next what are we doing next? We're doing some more granny stripes, and they can't get them to fit in, and that's because they've forgotten to do this last outside round. So bear that in mind. If you're ever finding that you can't get your pattern to fit, check that you have remembered to do the last round. I'll come and show you how to do that when I get all round the blanket with my squares. So I'll see you when I've got this join to do, and after that I'll finish off all my squares and come back and show you the last part. Now you can see that I have got to this corner. I'm going into the, I'm going into the corner of the previous square, making a slip stitch, and then into the blanket, and that's sharing the same space in the blanket as the join of this square, and then finishing off my corner. Woohoo! I've got to the end. Everything fits absolutely perfectly. There's no extra space or one space too short. Everything fits neatly. It's taken 7 squares to fit along between the outside edges of the blanket, but you have another one to do basically to take you round the corner. If and also please don't worry if you get to this point and you're maybe one short, so maybe what's happened is you've got to the end of your square here and this is an empty corner. Don't worry about that. That's just a little mistake that you've made somewhere along this line, and all you need to do is just look along. It could be that you've missed out space along the blanket when you've been, you've maybe jumped from a corner to a middle space and forgotten to work into one of them. You'll just need to look back, you'll find your mistake. It tends to be once you've made a mistake like that, you don't do it again. So don't worry about it. It doesn't take an awful lot to pull it back to the right space, and then you know that but you do know that with that number of squares and the correct number of clusters on your granny stripe round, everything is going to fit neatly. So I'm going to go round the corner now with this one, and this is my last colour of my group of 8, and I can't actually do any more along here until I do my 2 that I only made 1 of each square, because they're the ones that come up after this one. So I'll put this one in. It's going to stick out from the end of the blanket, but it's just joined in exactly the same way. So I'm going to do my 3 half trebles. Let me see if I can get this in camera before I start. 3 half trebles in the final square, like so, and then as normal find the space up from the corner in the blue square and the next space for the pink square. So in the blue square you've done your slip stitch, in the pink square you're doing your 3 half trebles. Slip stitch, 3 half trebles. If ever you think you've done something not quite right, just lay it down and look at it, and you'll see that if your 3 half trebles and 3 half trebles are butted up against each other, you've done it right. If it goes slightly out of sequence, then you've made a mistake. You've missed a slip stitch space probably. So I'm now going to get to the corner of this one. So 3 half trebles in the corner as usual. And I'm going to slip stitch into the corner of the previous square and also into the corner of the blanket, and then you've now got 3 sides to my mistake, you don't have 3 sides to finish off. You've got 1 side to work on, because this is considered to be the outside edge of the blanket, so that gets done later. So you're going to come down here and then take your next square to join it. So I'll do that. Finish off the corner of the pink square with 3 half trebles, and so on down the side. There we go. There we go, and that's us round the corner, ready to go along this side. Now, as you can see, my needle is empty because I only put 8 squares onto it. I didn't have any more of my first 2 squares made. So you would just move on to the next square that's on your knitting needle, which will be the Parma violet colour. I don't have that, but I'll just lay any old square down. I won't actually attach it as yet, but that is put in position. You would just work up and round and continue along the side. So that's how you get round the corner. Don't do the last 2 sides of that pink one, just the first 2 sides and then start joining the others. Right, I'll see you when I get right the way round and I'm back where I started, and I will have made the rest of those Parma violet and the pale rose squares, which are still needing to be made. So I'll see you then. And look here, the knitting needle is empty and all my squares are now attached to the blanket, with 3/4 of them surrounded by the half treble stitch. I've come all the way round. I didn't make any mistakes, thankfully, and I can do sometimes if I don't pay attention, but everything has fitted absolutely perfectly at every corner, and I've worked my squares in the correct sequence of colours because they were all on the knitting needle. I did finish the 2 that still had to have 3 of them made, and they were all finished and sewn in and added to my knitting needle. So everything is now on the blanket. And we've got to the point where we've joined right down to the bottom, and all we need to do now is to finish off this corner of the pink square, the very last square, with our half trebles. And then you can see the direction. We're going to work along this side, and then we have the entire perimeter of the blanket to go round, and then we'll come right back to here and finish off this corner. So it's right the way round the blanket now, and it's just again with half trebles. So I'm going to do round the corner, show you what happens at the corner, and I'm also going to do this part here and show you what happens there, because there's a neat little trick to make this part nice and tidy. So half trebles, yarn over, put your hook in, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all three. You'll be an expert at that now. So 3 half trebles in each space. There we go. And then we get to the corner, and that's just the way you would expect it to be. 3 half trebles. Chain 2. And we, oops, that didn't pull through properly. Chain that again. And then we're going to turn the blanket round so that we've got the new top edge to work along, and we're just going to continue along this side with 3 half trebles in this corner to finish it off. I'm trying to work quite loosely because my hand has got quite hot. It's been very cold up here in the studio, and I'm trying to be very careful with the heating and not put it on. And then when every so often I do put it on for a little while, and when it comes on, because I've got so many layers on to keep warm, I suddenly get very hot, so my hands are hot. So trying to avoid the squeak. Put this out of the way. Oh, start again. Let me just, I've got a yarn tangle off camera, so I'm just going to, that's better. I've moved my ball of yarn to a different corner and it's not going to get caught. Right, so we've got 3 half trebles in the next, oh, you can hear that squeak, little mouse in here. 3 half trebles in the next section, and now we come to this bulky looking section, and it's not, if you remember when we were having to, way back here, where were we? Here when we were working over a join, it's not that we're doing at this point, because we are not wanting to put a treble cluster over the top of this. We're wanting to finish off this corner and also finish off this corner. So we have got 2 treble clusters to put in, and what we do is we put in our first treble cluster, 1, 2, 3, which finishes off that corner, and then we have to get over to this corner, which is quite a distance to pull the yarn. So to help that, I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to pull apart the join, and I'm going to just put my hook into that and make a slip stitch. This doesn't mean anything, it's not adding any stitches, it's purely and simply moving the yarn, another chain stitch, moving the yarn from this corner over to this corner, and it keeps it nice and tidy. So then we put our 3 half trebles, pull my yarn, 3 half trebles in the next corner, and I'll let you see what that looks like. And you can see how that is nice and neatly travelled from one corner to the other. So you'll do that every time you come to this bulky part between the two squares. And apart from that, it's just 3 half trebles all the way along. 3 half trebles, chain 2 3 half trebles in each of the outer corners. So I'm going to work all the way round. I'll come back when I've got to this point, which is where I've started, and that will be the end of section 3 of the blanket. Well, that didn't take long. It doesn't take long to go round the outside edge of the blanket when it's this size. Once it's a bit bigger, because we're still pretty much nearer the centre than the outside, if you like, it will take a bit longer. But I've zipped round this one, remembering to do that fancy little bit with the chain 1, slip stitch chain 1 between the corners, and I'm now back to where I started. Now what I've done just now is I've put in my 3 half trebles to finish off the corner of this second last square, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip stitch not into this space here. I'm going to slip stitch into the corner of the pink square, and that just holds that nicely together. And cut my yarn. I'm finished with it. Pull it through, and that's me. So that's the border, outside edge of my section 3, the granny squares. What I have to do now is turn it over and just check all these bits and pieces that have still to be sewn in, because I'll do that now before I move on to the next section. And it's getting very dark outside, because although it's only 25 past 1 in the afternoon, there's a very dark cloud out there. So I'm using my artificial light to film this, so it's not brilliant, but best I can do in this time of the year. So I'm going to finish off for now. I'll be back with the next video for section 4, but I'm going for my lunch first.